And as Iran prepares for a final goodbye to its late supreme leader, fresh exchange of fire between US and Iran, it continues, with US threatening to trigger a larger conflict. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's burial follows a multi-day funeral ceremony that attracted millions of mourners across cities in both Iran and Iraq. The ceremony has become a show of unity, grief and anger for Iranian leaders and the general public. Just as the funeral rites headed into their final day, the US launched new strikes on Iran in retaliation for attacks on commercial shipping in the vital Strait of Hormuz. Iran claimed 2 days of US strikes killed 14 people and left 78 injured. The US Central Command said that they had struck approximately nearly 170 military targets in 2 days, 90 of them on the second day. Iran's Revolutionary Guards accused the US of targeting 2 bridges leading towards Mashhad in an effort to overshadow Khamenei's funeral. The train service between Tehran and Mashhad was suspended. All this just hours before Khamenei was to be buried in the city. Iran launched a swift retaliation. Iran's military said that it targeted sites in Kuwait, Qatar and Bahrain with one-way attack drones. The attacks included a Patriot missile interceptor system in Kuwait, an early warning system in Qatar and fuel tanks in Bahrain. The latest exchange of strikes appeared to dim hopes of turning a memorandum of understanding into a permanent deal to end the war. US President Donald Trump said that the MOU is over, but said that he did not expect a return to full-fledged war. Flying back to the US from a NATO summit in Ankara, Trump boasted that the US hit Iran very hard, claiming that the Iranian side now wanted to make a deal badly.
It's another way of doing it. We have many ways we can win, but we've already won militarily. They have very little left, and they want to make a deal so badly. They called a little while ago, they want to make a deal so badly. I just don't know if they're worthy of making a deal. I don't know that they're going to honor the deal. That's the problem. Because they're sort of crazy, to be honest with you. They're sort of crazy. They're a little bit out of control, but they want to make a deal. Badly. So,
Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Baghir Ghalibaf, struck a defiant tone, saying that the Strait of Hormuz would be open only under Iranian arrangements. Ghalibaf said that US still has not learned that bullying and breaking its promises no longer come without consequences. Sending a message to the US, he said, if you strike, you will be struck. All right, to discuss this further with me, I'm now being joined by James Marlowe, foreign and defense analyst, joining us live from London. James, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for making time. Just taking you back, and this is for all our viewers as well, we'll have those visuals on the screen of the funeral procession in Iran, in Qom, in Tehran, shortly in Mashhad, and also in Najaf and Karbala in Iraq. When you see those visuals, when you see the emotions, when you see the number of people on the streets, what they are chanting against Israel and America, and when you hear that defiant tone from their chief negotiator, is there any part of this which suggests that Iran is beaten militarily or economically?
Well, there's a number of points over there. Firstly, there is more support for this funeral and for the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in Iraq and in Lebanon and in other places, small places in Yemen, than there is in Iran. So that's worth noting as well, because the overwhelming majority of people just want this regime completely gone. But it does have support, as you mentioned, in Iraq and, of course, the Shiite community, mostly in the south and parts of Lebanon, parts of Beirut, rather, in Lebanon. In terms of what President Trump has said, and we just saw that clip again, I don't think it helps. It doesn't help world affairs, and it doesn't help the American people really understand what's going on when the president keeps saying, well, we've got them militarily, we've sunk their navy, we've destroyed their air force, etc., etc. He said this many, many times because clearly they still have these weapons in operation and they're using them. And this is very, very frustrating to the president. I think the reason why we heard some of the rhetoric yesterday or the day before in Ankara is I believe that he actually received specific intelligence that the Iranians were going to try and take him out on his way to Ankara for the NATO summit or sometime when he was there. Now, how close they got, this is unknown at this point, but for him to suddenly start calling them scum, disgusting, and all the other words that he used, clearly he got some information at that time which made him very, very angry. And as we both know, he doesn't even control that anger when he's facing journalists.
Yeah, just on that note, and I'll let you continue after that, is this speculation or are you basing your analysis on some genuine input on what that there was an attempt on his life and that's the reason he changed those flights and then changed back in Britain?
So I expected you to pick up on that because you're very, very astute when it comes to me saying certain things like that. It's based on speculation, but I think it's based also on my experience and dealing with foreign affairs for about 30 years, and also spending a huge amount of time on following what the Americans are doing, what President Trump is doing, and also watching Iran. And I've sat through many, many briefings, and something triggered him yesterday because it was very, very unusual, even for President Trump, to say that when the talks were still taking place. And don't forget, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, was actually over there speaking directly, or at least plans to speak again with the Iranian delegation. So it's very, very odd why he would say that. And then, of course, admitting, which he's never done before, admitting, yeah, we're probably going to strike them again tonight. So obviously it was going to happen unless the military were going to advise him otherwise. So something is clearly going, and he's clearly very, very frustrated.
Understood.
I think the general plan was from the Americans is to see whether they can actually hold this out for the next few months until the elections come in November, because that's crucial for the Republican Party and specifically for President Trump, because if he loses control of the House, the Democrats, of course, will take over. And there's also talk that the Democrats will make the same mistake that they did 6, 7, 8 years ago, and that is that they will go after President Trump and they would try to impeach him. In other words, instead of focusing on the actual election in 2 years' time, they will just go after Trump again, which may bring in another Republican person in the election in 2 years.
James.
But this is what is of a concern to the Republicans and to President Trump.
Yeah, James,
now,
just allow me. Let's just steer back to the topic that we want to discuss at this point when you talk about Iran. And you mentioned that the support for Iran within Iran, the support for the regime in Iran and the supreme leader in Iran, that is dwindling, whereas it is more in other regions like Lebanon and Iraq. But when you see those visuals from Tehran and those chants and the emotions, it doesn't seem so. It's being compared to the procession which was carried out for his predecessor Khomeini decades ago, and there were about 10 million people on the streets. Today is going to be the final rites. I want to understand from you, when we talk about Iran being weakened or being affected in whichever manner, the way they're going after all West Asia bases and other Gulf nations, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar now as well, repeatedly, and immediately after any kind of altercation or hostilities with the US, the way they spend no time in delay and go right after their targets, it seems that their targets are already fixed. They know their plan of action, but those visuals of the funeral, does it not, or in your understanding, does it project more of Shia unity against US and Israel and not just Iran against US and Israel now?
Well, if I just may pick up on that first point, Shivan, and that is, of course, the population of around 93 million, somewhere around there. Of course, many people have left the country, but 93 million within Iran. If we see TV pictures and wire pictures that are showing hundreds of thousands of people, that doesn't necessarily mean anywhere near that the overall majority of the Iranians are supporting this. In fact, even this time last year, it was estimated that around 10 to 15% of Iranians were supporting the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He doesn't have the support in the country, and they know that very, very well. The support comes from outside the country in the Shia communities, specifically in Iraq, as we mentioned. But this regime, and I don't know why President Trump said we got rid of the first leadership because they were terrible, and the second leadership, they weren't good, and this one I'm able to do business with, they're very reasonable, because everyone else, including his advisors, including the American military, and of course, including the Israelis as well, knew that this one could even be even worse than the first round, which is the same regime and the same, because at least those who we took out in the first round, in other words, the Ayatollah himself on the 28th of February. So this, of course, has got to be one of the longest Islamic funerals, more than 4 months, taking place in modern times. But that's another question. So I believe
Shia unity. Yeah, that was my larger question there, James. If you can just elaborate on that. Do you feel this is more of Shia unity which is being projected by Iran across Iran and Iraq, and this is all targeted against or aimed against US and Israel? This has become a larger cause or a larger war that they are projecting.
Absolutely. Yes, I definitely, because there's no reason why that they would have actually kept this man from being buried in the ground for more than 4 months. It's just unknown within Islamic faith, whether you're talking about Sunni or Shia as well. So definitely they've kept this. And when the feeling started to die down of those attacks, because of course more bombing attacks were taking place in Iran, and Iran was responding, and then there was the talks and negotiations. And as we know, news moves on and people tend to forget.
Yeah,
so
but
they
James,
wanted to
as
keep
they
this
shore
within
up,
the public eye.
Yeah, James, as they shore up more support, and not just in Iran, there were delegates from over 70 countries who came and attended that funeral procession, or the first day of those of the procession in Tehran. And then you have the remains being taken over beyond the borders into Iraq. And now those visuals coming in from Najaf and Karbala as well. This seems to only project Iran in a stronger light, and that will consequently mean a longer, prolonged war?
Well, I think you should also remember as well, there was mostly low-level delegations coming from Saudi Arabia and some of the other states as well. In the region. They weren't senior people, and that was done out of respect for the religion of Islam, as I understand it, even though that it's Shia as opposed to Sunni, and that's generally been accepted throughout the region, in the Middle East and the wider region, that you just send somebody just out of respect because they're dead. They go to perhaps the next world or whatever that may mean, depending upon your religion. So I don't think we should take too much of account into that.
Fair enough.
The problem for many of the Iranians is that this regime could be in power for much, much longer, of course, because the Americans don't really have a plan to get rid of this regime. And President Trump has said many, many times, we don't want to get rid of them anyway, because he knows he can't do that. And the only way to do that is to land American troops, perhaps with Israeli troops, and you're going to take a lot of casualties, and the Americans don't have the stomach for it. More than 50% of the people don't support this. But I think one of the reasons is because they just don't understand what is taking place. If you've ever been to the United States, and I lived on the West Coast for 3 years, I used to travel to New York a huge amount of time. Many Americans, and I love America, I love Americans, but many American people are not even aware of more than 20 or 25 of their own United States. They can't name you all 50 states. I mean, sometimes in order for me to get
they're largely disillusioned.
James, 50 states.
Yeah, I'm coming in there, James, because there is a lot of disillusionment regarding this war since the beginning, and it has reflected in those approval ratings for the US president. With the midterms right around the corner, there is a backward clock ticking on Donald Trump at this point. Whether it reflects in his statements or it doesn't, that is a fact. But I take your points, fair enough, regarding the delegations that made it to Iran. We'll need to wait and watch how this one goes. Iran is projecting power. US doesn't want to relent. Second wave of strikes for those strikes on commercial vessels. Iran is striking at unarmed commercial vessels. So there is really little right that you're finding in this entire situation. Let's wait and watch how this one goes. James, always a pleasure speaking with you. Look forward to debating with you again.